thing. So they're not a real photo. These are actually photos, and that's why, because they were produced in very small batches, and they were, I can show you here. Oh, I'm skipping ahead here. I'll get to it in a little bit, but they were not mass produced, obviously. If you want a picture of yourself dressed up like a cowboy, they weren't going to make 25 copies of those, unless you wanted it. And so there is one play. This one I actually missed out on eBay. I didn't get to buy this one. It was 5 ladies. And there's one that kind of annoys us history nerds who want to figure out where these pictures were taken, because there was a shop called the Postcard Shop in Minneapolis that was using the same cards as the arcade at 110 West Superior Street was. So we can't figure out if they were in Minneapolis or. It's super annoying, but we try. Quirky local history. So people like to sit by wells, fake wells. That was a pretty popular scene. And so some of the wells that we see have this shape and some have this shape. And there's a lot of them. You can see. And I think I also like these pictures because they aren't super formal. Like they're often like you were out with your buddies watching a movie, then you went and just wearing your regular clothes. You just stood there with yourself and your coat and your boots, and you just got your picture taken. I've figured it out. I think the one in Duluth had the longer bricks. Just for this one, those 2 guys on the right, there was a Duluth phone number written on the back of the postcard. So that's just a silly thing. And also you can look up, let's see if I can, here. You can look up the name of the studio or possibly photographer or address at the Minnesota Historical Society website. They have this huge directory of Minnesota photographers, and they will say about when the people were operating and when and where. So that can also be used if you have a family photo that says it was taken in Duluth. And a lot of times they have this very elaborate script on the bottom that says who the photographer was, but nobody ever wrote on the back, right? And so who is that? And so you can use the Minnesota Directory of Photographers to figure out about when that photographer was operating in Duluth. So that's kind of fun. So this one, again, we don't know for sure where that was. Trying to figure out, there's a lot of posts on Perfect Duluth Day. This one is hard. It was just comments where a few of us go back and forth and try to kind of speculate what's going on with those stories. And here's this guy on the left is the photographer who probably took those photos because he was working in that studio in those years. Mr. Furness, he later owned a theater. Trains were kind of a fake train bed or a balcony thing was popular. They don't look very happy, but there's a little card there that says leaving Duluth. And that was taken at 110 West Superior Street at the arcade studio. And here they're inside in this book, these people that have really delved into this topic, they have pictures sometimes of the studios where you could go in and pick, like, do you want to be on a train? Do you want to pretend to be a cowboy? Do you want to pretend to be sitting in a car? Sometimes they had those kind of sets. And so here's a painted train. And then again, when they made the postcards, they were real photos. They didn't print them on a big printing press. They were actual photos. And would have been taken I actually couldn't find my 19-teens camera, but they would just have a camera, just take a picture. Then they would get out the negative and develop that. These were really things that you could get the same day. They would take the negative then and do printing on postcard paper that was blank on one side. And then they would actually use some of this stuff in their studio, or if you were a little bit fancier hobbyist and wanted to buy some of this stuff for yourself, people were doing these at home as well. So they weren't always just a studio. I think it was lower, just like the Penny Arcade, come in and get a picture. And so those photographers might have had some gear like this. And if you were a little bit more serious hobbyist, you could buy this if you had some money and have this at home and produce them at home. And so some of the family postcards were actually not from a shop. They were done at home if the people were interested in that. And I have some evidence of that too here. So here's the Kodak amateur printer that you could buy for $5 in 1915. And they called it its latest idea in photographic printing. $5 in 1915 would be about $150 today. And because sometimes I have a lot of time to look around online, I found one right here. This is the 1914 amateur printer. You can see the little pending thing here. And you did need electricity. So it had a cord. It said that right on the manual that you had to make sure you had electricity. And so what they would do in the shop or at home, if you had one of these, is you didn't need a dark room. You just needed a negative, and you could put that on there. And then you would put, I'm not exactly sure how this all worked because it then was developed, and I haven't done black and white photography developing since I was like a teenager, and I would kind of like to again, but I haven't. Put this on here. They would like press a button, they would get a certain amount of light, and then you would put it in the developing bath and things, which is what I had that picture that showed kind of a larger scale one, where it actually did have to get dipped in some water, some chemicals to develop the print, and then a fixer to keep it lasting, not turning black all the way like sometimes you would in the black and white photography. And then you could, again, do it yourself. So here's the, oh, I'm sorry, the people that are online are probably really confused. And I might show it to the camera, but here's what the printer looks like. That's kind of dark there, but it was used, and it had a little, you're welcome to come up and look at it afterwards. It has a little kind of an automatic slider here that you can change what size you wanted your photo to be, your exposure to be. And you can see this one, I can pass around. This one was clearly done at home, I think, because it's very rough around the edges. There's like a hole in the negative, and there's nothing on the back. And this one was probably 1907, before 1907. And so if you want to pass it around, you can, I guess. And I don't know much about that one. That was just one I got on eBay to show the technique. Nobody ever wrote anything. And because it was done at home, we don't know where that person was from. So again, they would have the blanks. You could still, back in the 90s, if you got your photos printed, you could buy like a paper thing that maybe was sticky on one side, and you'd stick your picture to it, and then you could mail it like a postcard. So that's been going on since 1907 or a little bit later. You just buy them in 12 packs or whatever. And there also, if you didn't want to get as fancy with a printer, there were other things you could do with a little frame. Velox was the brand of paper that people often used. And they said you could do prints by gaslight. You would do this special, you had this little frame, you'd do the same thing where you'd like hold it up to the gaslight, and then you'd put it in your developer and get your picture to come out. And now, of course, we think of pictures as just like, oh, yeah, we can take them with our iPhone. But back then, can you imagine how sort of magical that would be? That if you could just take a picture of your kids or your parents or whatever, and then you can develop them. This is a picture. The Kodak about that time was really trying to advertise these and ask people to buy them and become a Kodak hobbyist and go out Kodaking with your camera. And so this is a woman using the developing tank, and it says here, this is the picture you made of me the day I developed my vacation negatives. And can you come over and bring some flash sheets? I don't know what that is. We'll make exposures and develop them while you're here. It's such fun to see your negatives so soon after they're made. And what she's using is this, a film tank. And it was a way to get the film out of your camera without a dark room, and then kind of crank it in there in a way that then the developing chemicals could go onto it and whatnot. And so you could actually make your negatives at home and then print from them however you want. And then this was again a Kodak. They would mail these out to people from like a optical store that was selling these kinds of gear. And this was just, it wasn't real writing, but the Kodak idea has made it all very simple. So it was just really it's kind of a cusp when pictures were not just in the realm of expensive portrait studios, and it wasn't maybe quite yet where everyone could have a camera. It was kind of a fancier, you could go out, this says Kodaking on the beach. So that was, they would go out. It was apparently a thing you could do on a date. You could do it for fun. There were clubs where you'd go out Kodacking together and going around taking pictures, and then maybe developing them at home. This is one that I found at an antique store kind of by accident a while ago before I was into this. And it was also, I think, a homemade printed one. And the text here, it says, I thought I would wait until I had a picture taken of myself, but everyone Lily or me took were spoiled. So I will send one of myself. These are the first ones I have taken, so they're not very good. so this was, and she mailed it to her cousins in Mattawa. So I think this, it doesn't look like a great picture, but that was probably, they probably did that in their living room, and it was probably like, ooh, amazing. That was a big deal. And I can't quite read what that says. Maybe just park. And I think it says up there, who these people are. Like, it's just the cousins, or it was probably her daughters. All right, so that, I guess, is the summary. With one of the things, if you want to look for these online, or if you want to look at yours to see if they're real, there is a comparison in some of these online books, but looking at it just to see if it's really a photo, or is it like a lithograph that has all those little points on it, or looks like pixels or something now. You can sometimes look at the back to see if it kind of how it feels. Does it feel like a photo? And then where was it taken? Did they get a stamp on there? And was it actually a serious picture, or was it just for fun because people were doing that back then? Then you'd mail it out. It'd almost be like Instagram or Facebook or a text to your family, like, here I am. And people really used them that way. They would say, hey, are you coming over next weekend? And they would mail the postcard out, whether it was a photo or just another postcard that they had at their house. That was a good, cheap way, 1 cent, to communicate. A lot cheaper than trying to, well, if you didn't even have a phone, you couldn't do it that way. So this was definitely a communication method. So, and then the printing, kind of trying to figure out, where was this made? How was it made? I always find, if you can't know much about the person, or even if you know if it's your relative, but you don't know much about them, if you look at the picture, you can say, like, what else was going on here? And who took this picture? And where were they? And why did they take this picture? For me, genealogy isn't just the names and the pictures. It is trying to figure out stories and knowing. I do know my grandfather was kind of interested in photos, so we have a lot from him. And so we can see, like, this was from my family collection, so you can kind of know, maybe your relative was a hobbyist, or maybe they had a friend that was, and they took these pictures. I also want to make sure people don't just look at some of these postcards and think, oh, that was just, maybe that was a famous movie star or something that they bought a postcard of. No, this is cousin Helen that mailed to her niece and nephew or something. I do wonder with cousin Helen if this was truly her first set, or if she had borrowed it for the picture. I don't know, but you can pass around cousin Helen there. And some others here. And so you can know some things. All right, so I do have a few resources, but if you wanted to come up and look at these up here, or kind of play with any of these, I haven't figured out if this would actually work in real life, but I think that might be kind of fun to revive. Just to think, now pictures come from our iPhones. Back then, pictures were being produced with metal, wooden things with the dovetailed corners. It was just a sort of like the same technology in some ways, but a completely different technology in other ways, that it kind of links us to that past and makes us understand a little bit more about what was going on back then. All right, any questions? Or if you want to look at any of our fun stuff? These are mine. I did order this one. You can get them interlibrary loan for sure. This one I got interlibrary loan, and then I did decide to buy it because it has the full dating in the back, and I just couldn't. I didn't feel like I could just photocopy it. So we could, you could order it again interlibrary loan, or we might. There's a new one coming out soon that I did ask them to buy. That will be at the library. And this one is American. See if I go back. A lot of people have really studied these, the American photographic postcard from 1900 to 1920. That was really the heyday of a lot of those. Again, starting in 1907, but then later into the teens and 20s. And a lot of them were maybe advertising, or they were just these everyday glimpses that were less formal than the studio photos. So you're welcome to look at those. And these two, my personal limit is $5 online, but I have found all sorts of different varieties. So it looks like even some of the formal studios in town, like the Ely Photo Studio is one that you hear about a lot about. It looks to me like they offered this cheaper option where you could just get your postcard made. So this is a lady from the Ely studio with that. And again, some that were just probably homemade that I don't know much about. But again, that really that accessibility of pictures of just, you didn't have to go to the fancy studio and get lots of, get all dressed up. You could just take a picture of your kid with their toys. And then you had a picture that you could mail to your relatives if you wanted to. But again, a lot of them were never used. They were just pictures. All right. So yeah. Oh, yes, I realized. Okay. Yeah. How do I do that? Okay. Do I have to stop sharing? Okay. Hi. Again, this is, I am not used to some hybrid stuff here. So thank you. I can show these guys the pictures. Here's the one that had the writing on the back about that they had spoiled their other ones. And we have cousin Helen with her fur. Don't know if that was her fur or not. And then this was one I passed around too. That was a very homemade printed one before 1907 because it doesn't have the divided back and it's kind of rough around the edges, but still a lovely picture of some apples. And the printer, I could come back, but can you guys see this in the camera? Okay, so it just has a little slot on the front, on the top, where you put the paper in, and then you would push a button and a little light would come on for a minute, and then you would develop the picture. And it has this little window on the side, which I'm not entirely sure. I don't fully understand. You can find the directions digitized online to actually make it work, but I haven't gotten that far yet. Yeah. I might. This says it's from 1914 and the cord has been very much pasted together, but I might someday. And actually one of the bulbs broke in here. There's a red bulb and a white bulb. And I think the red bulb was the safe light where you could kind of get it all set up. And then you'd press the button for the white light and it would come on for just a minute. And so you can actually see the little ceramic light sockets and everything in there. But I ordered it on eBay and they came in the mail and it was all shattered when I got it. So yeah, I know. I might not. Right. And this was honestly one of the only ones I saw that still had the cord and all its parts. A lot of them would say, just for parts or something. And I didn't necessarily buy it to use it. I just was very intrigued by the design and kind of how clever it all fits together, and the wood.
Gina, did you give an approximate year on that?
1914 is the patent date, and then those ads that I had were 1915. So that was, I think, again, it was really between 1900 and 1920. That was kind of the peak of this. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yep. I know. And some of them I've seen when I was first kind of looking into these, I was seeing them on like Norwegian family forum sites or something where like, here's cousin Frederick sent this picture back and it was taken at, in the Owl Studio in Duluth, Minnesota. And so that was, and it made me think that it was a cheaper, more accessible way to get your picture taken to mail back to the old country. Mm-hmm. Yep, Joyce.
When I lived in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, we did the collection of the local photographer from the 1890s until 1970.
Oh, wow.
He was in town. One of the coolest things that he would do is that whenever there was a convention in town, or all of the Lutherans are coming to town from the county system, come and join us, he would go out and take pictures of the parade in the morning, rush back to his studio, and had postcards available by supper time.
Yeah.
So it was a way of
Mhm.
making a living,
Mhm.
in addition to the ones of, oh, here's a cute kid down at the beach,
Mhm.
or here's
Yeah.
the local farm or whatever. But I thought the commercial aspect of that
Mhm.
was very interesting.
Definitely.
And it was doable.
They also
On
people.
a little, probably a little
Yep,
machine
probably
just
that.
like that.
Yep, they said you could do like 100 an hour. You just like, do that. And actually, in some of these books, there's like local disasters. The big train wreck. Who would take a picture of it and then sell it. But it is. These are sort of like artisan postcards, right? They were postcards, but they were definitely local and small business produced. They weren't coming from some big company out east. So I think that's why it's appealed to a lot of people, in that these were not super polished, fancy national companies. These were just local guy, make some postcards.
He also liked featuring himself in a lot of the photos.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Oh yeah. The Zoomers. What was that question? You were just talking about how a local photographer could run out in the morning and take a picture of like a parade or a group, and then actually print these postcards with the machine, the printer that I have here, and sell them by that afternoon. Yep. So it was, there are actually stories in here too of people that would travel with this stuff and take a picture of people's barn and house or whatever, because you could stick it in your car, or your horse-drawn wagon or whatever. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Mentioned Wisconsin, but I'm from Michigan, so I was wondering, is there still a place to find what happened in other states or about?
Yeah, I have really, I put on here eBay as one of my sources because I really learned all of this on eBay by searching for like RPPC Duluth, real photo postcard Duluth. And then people, when they put them on eBay, they often put a lot of details. So you could look up your hometown, say RPPC Duluth, or your town in eBay. And then all these people, there are these people who sell thousands of postcards a year. They're just dealers. And they often will put the name of the studio on the back. So if it was a little studio in Duluth or in that town, like the Owl Studio, then you'd find a whole bunch probably. The other one, the general ones that I found that don't have a place name, I have found generally by looking up the kind of paper that they're using on the back, because I wanted something of a certain era. Like this one is a Velox, which was the brand name that a lot of people are using for the paper. So you could, yeah. But I would recommend putting in that if you don't know, or if you know any studios in that town, you could try that on eBay.
The State Historical Society of just about any state, especially up here north, where we don't have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of history.
Yeah.
We're about as old as photography, which
That's true.
they will usually have the list of here are all photographers.
It's this kind of a niche thing that people, yeah.
You might find the same image.
Oh, here. Well, Mary, this doesn't help you for Michigan, but this would help you for, oh no, I didn't put it on there. Sorry, I didn't put it on there, I guess. But the Minnesota Historical Society, if anyone else wants one of these, you could. These just have the books, if anybody wants. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, you can pass those back. Yeah, definitely. Yep. And it doesn't even, yeah, right. And because photography, I was going to say the Minnesota Historical Society, it seems to be, it's a thing. Maybe it was more even 20 years ago, where people are really interested in historic photographers and what were they doing and how were they doing it. And so people have often gone online and maybe written a story about the local photographer, or maybe they've cataloged all the photographers they've been able to track down in the city directories. You could check city directories too for photographers and then see. I didn't even bring my catalog cabinet cards today, but those, you've all seen those probably where they are. It's like a 2-layer thing. It has a big fancy script on the bottom, probably that says the name of the photographer. And those were often the very dressed up pictures at the photography studio. And those often would get put in people's albums. And for whatever reason, they wouldn't label them. And so then you can, so many of them are floating around with no names on them. And I do occasionally buy those on eBay too, but I didn't bring any today. Yeah. Yep. I've seen that. And that's a whole different niche of postcards. Those are the, yeah. Oh, sorry, people. Oh, yeah. Right. Oh. Oh. I've heard that for the depot too. There's one where the depot is like red or something, and it just is not red. Yeah, and even this one, like you can tell these are not really real photos. They're just probably hand colored in some way. And I've seen on eBay, you could actually, even at home, you could buy a little Velox photo color kit that was almost like watercolors, and you would kind of push it down onto the picture. So you could like make someone wearing a pink dress or whatever. It wasn't super accurate, but and those still, people have them around. They're sort of ephemera that maybe people are trying to sell for $100, but it fascinates me, the technology of how they were trying to make a little color in the picture. And you can see those online. Oh. Oh. Yeah, they would actually like by hand. Yeah, yep. Doesn't always look very realistic, but yeah, they tried. Definitely tried the colorization. Yeah. Let's see, postcards of events. Like, yep, someone says they have fire, snowstorm, car crash. Yep, definitely people were attracted to that. But again, if you think about it, it was like Facebook, I think. And people would have whole albums full of their postcards, and they would show each other their postcards. And it was a way to learn about the world or remember things and kind of show them off back in the day. So just different technology. Anything else? Any other questions? Yeah, I don't know. The chat has, oh, sorry, I didn't have the chats here. Okay. Better show. Yeah, sorry, I didn't repeat the question. Share the object with the camera. I did not bring a camera, unfortunately. But you've all seen pictures of old cameras. I think they didn't have very fancy, like in these little shops, they probably just had, folded out. Next time I do this presentation, maybe I'll bring one. But it just had like a bellows, and it would fold it out and then quick take it. And part of why the postcard format was so exciting is that some of the cameras had, the negatives were that size. The film was that big. I think this actually came with this film. I think this might have been, I don't even know what this is. It's film. It was some film from a Brownie camera that just came along with this film tank. And so then you didn't have to mess with enlarging or anything. You would just then put it right on your printer thing, and then it's basically a contact print if you're familiar with photography. And so that was, some of these cameras were actually marketed as postcard cameras, and then you could join the craze of mailing out postcards. So that's what they did. Oops. And kids these days, my kids don't even know what negatives are. so I had to have this one. It's kind of fun. I'm just old enough that I did play around with that stuff. And my dad took pictures of me as a kid, and a lot of black and white photos of me as a baby, because he was doing his own darkroom stuff. But that was pretty old school by then. Or maybe artistic, but he got rid of it years ago. Yeah. Right, yeah. Just use the little clicker. Yep. Well, thank you. Yeah, if anyone wants to come up and look more closely at these weird objects, that were part of the technology, but I just thought it was funny that it's a Kodak printer from 1914. So, and I promised myself I wasn't going to buy a bunch of actual antiques, but then I was on eBay for too long and it was on good sale. And so it's a fun little prop. And sometimes they even come with their manuals, or you can find their manuals online. A lot of these things have been digitized as well, so you can really go back and see like how much did it cost and how did you use it and how did all that work. So here's the instructions for the film tank. It did. It did. I know. And this one was all complete. It's not 100% complete, but it has the reel to wind the film onto, and it needs to have a tank as well. It doesn't have its waterproof tank, but you would wind it onto these reels and then immerse it in the chemical. Yeah. Yep. So this was probably for the wider ones, and this one is actually really disintegrating, so I'm not going to get that out. But I mean, it's what I remember doing in a dark room. You wrap up the film and then you immerse it in the chemicals and things. So this was being promoted as a way to do that without a dark room. You could just do it with your fancy corset on or whatever in your regular house. So yeah. Anyway. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Probably. It depends though. I mean, so that was part of it. Like if, a lot of small towns had their photo studio and maybe some of those were more expensive, but I think judging from some of the things I've found, you could probably get the cheaper postcard version of your picture maybe, and that might have been a cheaper thing, or you could go to one of these penny arcades and get it 3 for 10 cents or 3 for 25 cents. But every once in a while, there was a famous photographer on the west, more in the west, who would go around and take pictures of homesteaders, and he was just a traveling photographer. So every once in a while, they'd do that, and then if you had some of this gear, you could just print the picture right there and sell it to the person. So it's possible. Yeah, Duluth had a lot. Mm-hmm. But I bet whatever biggest town was near them up there, I'm sure Hibbing had some, or yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't found any from up there, but I think I picture it being a little bit of a bigger city thing. Like you were downtown, go checking in a movie, then go take your picture, dress up like a cowboy. It was maybe not a small town thing that you would do as much. Duluth was a pretty big happening town back in those days. So sometimes I like to think they're either tourists or they were just having a night out on the town, and getting their picture taken. Was it affordable for any people, average people? When was this happening? Okay, I've got questions. Um, the post, and I wish I could kind of go back to my slideshow, but I can't really. The postcards that I found, some of them, if they say a price, it's usually about 3 for 25 cents, which I've looked up and tried to convert that. It's about $4 now. So if you went to like a theme park and there was like a little photo booth and you wanted to go in there and take pictures with your friends, maybe it'd be like $4 or $5. So back then, these little postcards were just $3 or $4. I've had a hard time trying to figure out how much a formal sitting in the formal studio would cost. I can't find that very well. I found a few things that mentioned that it would have maybe, like, you could have gotten a set of like 12 fancy cabinet cards for maybe like the equivalent of $50 or something like that. So I think these were much more accessible. And if you had the money to buy, this was like $5, which would be 150 bucks. So probably, if you were a more wealthy family that wanted to play around with this. But it definitely was more accessible than it had been maybe 30, 40 years ago before, where it had to be big glass plates and big things and big cameras, and you had to sit really still for a long time to get your picture taken. So this was really kind of a step along the way with the technology, where it wasn't just super fancy studios, but it wasn't just everyone whipping out their camera. So yeah, I can go back here. See if I can find, well, here's a price list. The developing tank was $2.50 to $6. The amateur printer was $5. You could get different attachments and stuff. What? I know, I'm sorry. It's about 15. It was about in 1915. You could buy the developing tank thing like this for about $5, which would be about $150 today. So it wasn't for everyone, obviously, but if you could go to a shop and get it done there, then it was 3 for 25 cents. And a lot of them say on the back that if you return, duplicates can be furnished if this card is returned within 60 days. So they would probably store the negatives for about 60 days and you could go back and get another one. But after that, that was it. And remember, no photocopiers, no nothing. So if you wanted more, I guess you could, if you got back in time to get those negatives. Let's see if this one also said duplicates can be furnished if the card is returned within 60 days. Because it is just to get your mind around that, you don't just say, oh, quick, can I just grab a copy of that? No, that was a big deal to even have something like this. This one was pasted into an album, you can see. So yeah, okay, so I can't actually see the Zoom anymore. Anything else, Stephen, that's popping up there? Yeah, there's all sorts. And again, these appeal to me too, because they are much more informal. There's people take pictures of their dog or their horse or their kids or their toys or their whatever. And it wasn't like you had to go troop downtown to the fancy studio and sit there while they did a slow exposure. This was really the start of this book. He calls it the people's photography. It was, again, starting to be very accessible, at least more accessible than it used to be a few years before. Yeah. Thanks for your patience, people online too. Maybe it wasn't the easiest thing to do hybrid, but we're trying. And like the booklet that came with it, the manual. All right, anything else in person? Yeah, some people brought some today. That's great. And if you have pictures too, I think I have only one in here that's my relative. I don't actually know who it is. But we had a lot of other photos. But again, with this one, it made me wonder, so who took this? It does kind of look like it was in a studio. So maybe it was just a cheaper way to get your picture on a postcard back then. So yeah. Which one? That one? I wonder if that one, can you see the company of the, okay, yep, that one's in there and that one. If you don't know the date on that one, it's hard to read, probably. Yeah, it's a little, but okay. That's I think that one's in here quite a bit. So if you wanted to look through this and try to see if you could date that one, a lot of them they just say 1907. but they have, so then you could take that, you take that little box and you compare it on here and they say these were 1907. Yeah. Is that Jim Thorpe? On there? Yeah, that's great. It's really cool. It doesn't maybe look like it was mailed though, like it doesn't have a stamp. Maybe he just hand delivered it or something, maybe. Although it does, I wonder, unless somebody like took the stamp off, I don't know. Huh. Interesting. Or sometimes people intend to mail it and then they ended up bringing it home with them or something. But yeah, that's really cool. And I wonder, does it kind of look like a studio? Like it might have, it probably, okay. Because I think they, oh, yep, it's like a painted.
Yeah.
I bet that's that same kind of deal where maybe there was one downtown and they went there. And again, you could make it silly or you could just make it serious. And it was a much more affordable option than the fancy place. Oh, that's great. And you had some too that you brought. Cool. Well, it's already 7. I don't want to keep anyone if anybody wants to go, but if you actually want to look up here, oh, and I also will say, if anyone's really interested in a quirky little online thing starting tomorrow, we're doing an online history goose chase, which is a little like a scavenger hunt thing where you take pictures or make some art and then take a picture of it and submit it, and then people get points. And then I'll do a drawing for some history books and things next week, right before Tony Jerkin's presentation next Tuesday. And we did one in January and it was really fun. People got kind of into it. So, you know, anyone who wants to do it, you have to download the Goose Chase app to your phone. But we'll have it on our website too. Yeah, he let's talk to him today. He published his book. It's just out now. He finally it's the Grand Old Buildings book. And he'll talk a little bit about buildings that are on the National Register and landmark status. And a little bit maybe about Marianne Norton that helped him learn all this. Okay, and it's the Marianne Norton lecture series presentation that we're doing. We do about 2 a year next Tuesday at 6 at the main library. Tuesday at 6. You can, I think you can just come now. We had different things about how many people you could fit in a room, and we had to be really careful, and I think it'll probably just be fine. There is a link on the website, the library website, that you could sign up if you want to make sure that you're on the list. But yeah, he just delivered some today. They were having trouble getting enough paper and things, but they're real nice hardcovers that have all the Duluth buildings, and not all, but the big old landmark buildings, whether they still exist or not, are in there. And he did a lot of the research with Marianne, and so she's listed as an author. Yep. So yeah, that'll be next Tuesday, and this is a little bit related. It's a kind of an early history month where we're doing a bunch of things right at the beginning of the month, and then not much more. But thanks for coming to this one. So yeah. All right. Well, have a good night. Oh yeah, and check to see if there's any. Yes, please come up and look. These are not precious heirlooms. Yeah, I don't see anything else on there.
Thank you, those of you, if you're still online.
Yeah, thank you for attending online.
If you have any questions, Gina's at the library.
Yes, email me or call the library. Thank you. I'm gonna leave.